the pure, unadulterated evil is unleashed on this world. The people of Israel lived through one such moment this weekend. The bloody hands of the terrorist organization Hamas, a group whose stated purpose for being is to kill Jews. This was an act of sheer evil. More than 1,000 civilians slaughtered, not just killed, slaughtered in Israel. Among them, at least 14 American citizens killed. Parents butchered using their bodies to try to protect their children. Stomach-turning reports of babies being killed. Entire families slain. Young people massacred while attending a musical festival to celebrate peace. Women raped, assaulted, paraded as trophies. Families hid their fear for hours and hours, desperately trying to keep their children quiet to avoid drawing attention. And thousands of wounded, alive but carrying with them the bullet holes and the shrapnel wounds and the memory of what they endured. You all know these traumas never go away. There's still so many families desperately waiting to hear the fate of their loved ones, not knowing if they're alive or dead or hostages. Infants in their mother's arms, grandparents in wheelchairs, Holocaust survivors abducted and held hostage. Hostages whom Hamas has now threatened to execute in violation of every code of human morality. It's abhorrent. The brutality of Hamas, these bloodthirstiness brings to mind the worst rampages of ISIS. This is terrorism. But sadly, for the Jewish people, it's not new. This attack has brought to the surface painful memories and the scars left by a millennia of anti-Semitism and genocide of the Jewish people. So in this moment, we must be crystal clear. We stand with Israel. We stand with Israel. And we will make sure Israel has what it needs to take care of its citizens, defend itself, and respond to this attack. There's no justification for terrorism. There's no excuse. Hamas does not stand for the Palestinian people's right to dignity and self-determination. Its stated purpose is the annihilation of the state of Israel and the murder of Jewish people. They use Palestinian civilians as human shields. Hamas offers nothing but terror and bloodshed with no regard to who pays the price. The loss of innocent life is heartbreaking. Like every nation in the world, Israel has the right to respond, indeed has a duty to respond to these vicious attacks. I just got off the phone with the third call with Prime Minister Netanyahu, and I told him, the United States experience what Israel is experiencing, our response would be swift, decisive, and overwhelming. We also discussed how democracies like Israel and the United States are stronger and more secure when we act according to the rule of law. Terrorists purposely target civilians, kill them. We uphold the laws of war, the law of war. It matters. There's a difference. Today, Americans across the country are praying for all those families that have been ripped apart. A lot of us know how it feels. It leaves a black hole in your chest when you lose family. Feeling like you're being sucked in. The anger, the pain, the sense of hopelessness. This is what they mean by a human tragedy, an atrocity on an appalling scale. But we're going to continue to stand united, supporting the people of Israel who are suffering unspeakable losses and opposing the hatred and violence of terrorism. My team has been in near constant communication with our Israeli partners and partners all across the region and the world from the moment this crisis began. We're surging additional military assistance, including ammunition and interceptors, to replenish Iron Dome. We're going to make sure that Israel does not run out of these critical assets to defend its cities and its citizens. My administration has consulted closely with Congress throughout this crisis. And when Congress returns, we're going to ask them to take urgent action to fund the national security requirements of our critical partners. This is not about party or politics. This is about the security of our world, the security of the United States of America. We now know that American citizens are among those being held by Hamas. I've directed my team to share intelligence and deploy additional experts from across the United States government to consult with and advise Israeli counterparts on hostage recovery efforts. Because as president, I have no higher priority than the safety of Americans being held hostage around the world. The United States has also enhanced our military force posture in the region to strengthen our deterrence. The Department of Defense has moved the USS Gerald R. Ford Carrier Strike Group to the Eastern Mediterranean and bolstered our fighter aircraft presence. And we stand ready to move in additional assets as needed. Let me say again, to any country, any organization, anyone thinking of taking advantage of this situation, I have one word: don't. Don't. Our hearts may be broken, but our resolve is clear. Yesterday, I also spoke with the leaders of France, Germany, Italy, and UK to discuss the latest developments with our European allies and coordinate our united response. This comes on top of days of steady engagement with partners across the region. We're also taking steps at home. In cities across the United States of America, police departments have stepped up security around centers of Jewish life. The Department of Homeland Security and the Federal Bureau of Investigation are working closely with state and local law enforcement and Jewish community partners to identify and disrupt any domestic threat that could emerge in connection with these horrific attacks. This is a moment for the United States to come together, to grieve with those who are mourning. Let's be real clear. There is no place for hate in America. Not against Jews, not against Muslims, not against anybody. We reject. What we reject is terrorism. We condemn the indiscriminate evil, just as we've always done. That's what America stands for. You know, just over 50 years ago, I was thinking about it this morning, talking to the Secretary of State, the Vice President in my office. Over 50 years ago, as a young senator, I visited Israel for the first time as a newly elected senator. And I had a long, long trip, a meeting with Golda Meir in her office just before the Yom Kippur War. And I guess she could see the consternation on my face as she described what was being faced. They were facing. We walked outside in that sort of hallway outside her office to have some photos. She looked at me all of a sudden and said, "Would you like to have a photograph?" And so I got up and followed her out. We were standing there silent, looking at the press. She could tell, I guess, I was concerned. She leaned over and whispered to me, she said, "Don't worry, Senator Biden. We have a secret rep in here in Israel." My word is what she said. We have no place else to go. We have no place else to go. For 75 years, Israel has stood as the ultimate guarantor of the security of Jewish people around the world, so that the atrocities of the past could never happen again. And let there be no doubt, the United States has Israel's back. We will make sure the Jewish and democratic state of Israel can defend itself today, tomorrow, as we always have. It's as simple as that. These atrocities have been sickening. We're with Israel. Let's make no mistake. Thank you.
Mr. President, what was your reaction?
Okay, you've just been listening to the U.S. President, Joe Biden, and his address from the White House on the Israel-Gaza war. A very strong speech. We're going to be talking to Marwan Bishara, Al Jazeera Senior Political Analyst. You're joining us from Paris. First, though, let's go live to Kimberly Halkett, our White House correspondent in Washington, D.C. Kimberly, it's not the first time that Biden speaks since this is day 4 of the war. Not the first time we've heard Biden, but the first time we've heard him like this, in this much detail. And, you know, he chose to open his speech with, I think, with a very strong emotional payload, it's fair to say.
Yeah, the United States has Israel's back, and certainly we've always known that in terms of the dollars that are spent, but it's certainly something that was reiterated by the U.S. president. And a lot of what we heard in this speech was things that we've heard in the past few days, that Israel has a right to defend itself, that it has, the United States wants to make sure that it has what it needs to respond. In other words, the president there, as commander-in-chief of the U.S. military, saying that it will surge in terms of the munitions that the Israeli military needs in order to defend itself. The U.S. president outlining there, we expected we might have had a few more details than we actually got from the president. We were a little thin on details there. But the U.S. president talking about his call with the Israeli prime minister, that the Israeli military is promising a swift and overwhelming response in terms of what it calls retaliation towards Hamas. What I do want to point out, though, is one sort of point of what you might call hypocrisy on the part of the U.S. president, where he talked about the United States in alliance with Israel, saying that what the distinction between what he called the terrorists is that they believe they uphold the law in terms of the rules of international law and war. He said that only terrorists would attack civilians, but clearly that is not entirely accurate, because what we've seen in recent days, obviously, is the Israeli military cutting off not only food, but electricity and water to the Palestinians in Gaza. We've certainly seen the attacks that have been not surgical, but in fact being sort of a large swath of apartment complexes that we know have allowed for women, children, elderly to be caught up in this. And so for the president to say that they have been abiding by the rules of law certainly is would not be accurate. And to be partnering with Israel in this would certainly not be accurate. And I think that one more thing that we should point out in all of this is the language the president used when he talked about the United States coming together, and this is not a time for party or politics. This is about the security of the world. This is very much the type of language that we heard back around the September 11th attacks. And many people have called this Israel's 9/11, for lack of a better term or terminology. And many might be sort of almost alarmed when they hear this, because when it comes to kind of the military-industrial complex and the warmongers on Capitol Hill, one can kind of be troubled by hearing this, that maybe this is a White House pivoting towards a conflict or a broader conflict. As much as they say they are not looking to see this escalate, that they may at least be preparing for that.
Well, Kimberly, stand by. Stay with us. Everything you've said is duly noted. It's also interesting to note the contrast. Even as President Joe Biden was speaking, we had the live picture of the skies over Gaza, and we saw repeated military bombardments of the Gaza Strip. Marwan, I want to bring you in, and I want to get your thoughts on this speech. U.S. President Joe Biden saying Israel has not only a right to respond, but quote, a duty to respond.
Yes. You know, having followed Prime Minister Netanyahu who's a very slick speaker with excellent English and an incredible reservoir of sound bites. Having read his books and followed his speeches for the past 30 years, I tell you, every single word Biden said is a Netanyahu word. I think the Prime Minister of Israel has once again brainwashed the American president. And it's really sad to see the leader of the free world, as he calls himself, repeating word for word, verbatim, what Netanyahu, I guess, have told him. Because much of that soundbite that we just heard from the American president sounds to me like he was told from Netanyahu. The point about the sole purpose of Hamas is to kill Jews, bloodthirsty. This is not an American president's words. This is the Netanyahu's words, and he's been using them forever. And the point about the Palestinians using a human shield, this is Netanyahu's soundbite. That's not an American president's soundbite. You would always expect that an American president, when it comes to Israel, that American presidents act like the grown-ups in the room, and that they would, advise patience and advise maturity and advise, certain soberness towards dealing with these sorts of questions that are complicated in the Middle East. Except in this case, what we see is President Biden repeating what the Israeli Prime Minister told him. And on the other points that Kimberly mentioned, I don't have to repeat them, but they are very accurate, because the indiscriminate bombing of Gaza and the collective punishment of Gaza and the blockading and the siege and cutting off of electricity, fuel, food, goods, and so on and so forth, that is not international law, and these are not the laws of war. This is a direct violation of international law, and President Biden knows it. He knows it. But he chose, once again, for the third time that I heard him the last 3 days, he chooses again and again to ignore the plight of the Palestinians, which is absolutely nonsensical, because this conflict involves two people. Now, it's okay, it's expected for leaders to demonize one another. And it's okay and it's expected for the American president and the Israeli prime minister to demonize Hamas and Palestinian leadership in general. It's called politics. But dehumanizing an entire people is not politics, it's racism. When you dehumanize the Palestinian people who have been living under occupation for more than 55 years, dispossessed of their belongings for the past 75 years, this dehumanization is racism. They cannot continue to be racist towards the Palestinians because they are the weaker party, or for political expediency, which takes me to the third point. He says we're all united and we're all this and that and the other thing. Humbug. We all know, and you read that throughout the American press, that Biden is trying to jump on the bandwagon because the Republicans had undermined him and accused him of financing, incorrectly as it might be, Iran that finances this sort of operation against Israel. So he is basically regaining the initiatives, and instead of saying, no, we did not, and the money is still in the Qatar Central Bank, he's basically now trying to kill by going even beyond what the Republicans have been saying and showing this incredible friendship to Israel and unconditional support. And once again, he underlined that America is dispatching the aircraft carrier and the strike force to the East Mediterranean. And he said and warned anyone, state or non-state actor, which I presume probably is Hezbollah, don't, he said. So what does that mean? Is he issuing an ultimatum that if anyone attacks Israel, including Hezbollah, America is going to get involved? Really? America wants to get involved into another regional war after Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Somalia, and so on and so forth? This is the president that promised to end the forever wars and got humiliated out of Afghanistan. He really wants to start another war because Hamas carried a gruesome attack in southern Israel. That is not a grown-up conversation. That's not a grown-up speech. And that is not a way to deal with a complicated conflict, and certainly not by dehumanizing an entire people. That is racism.
Well, Marwan, how do you read that line, the one you just referenced? He said, quote, any country, organization thinking of taking advantage of this situation, don't. it appears the U.S. president is putting his money where his mouth is, to the extent that they're providing military, they are surging, I think is the word that's being used today, surging their military aid to Israel. They're going to replenish their ammunition stocks for the Iron Dome system. And even as I speak, we just saw the U.S. aircraft carrier that's being sent to the region. So there is real military hardware that is being, that is being increased and that Biden is bringing to bear on this situation.
And it's ultimately mad. All our hearts goes to all the civilians dying, including American civilians and Israeli civilians. But the idea you respond to the killing of civilians by sending aircraft carriers to the East Mediterranean, and I've just read that there's Israeli reports that maybe another aircraft carriers might be sent towards the East Mediterranean. This is just madness. And by the way, October 10 apparently is World Mental Health Day. So I'm worried that we are all losing our minds, because the idea that an American president issues an ultimatum, here where we are with our aircraft carriers that could probably, start a third world war, that we are here and we are warning you, any one of you that will, attack or take advantage of the situation, then that presumably America will respond. This is a dangerous escalation. And I'll tell you why this is particularly a dangerous escalation. And allow me to use just one concept in military strategic affairs. Thucydides' trap, which basically says you build up your forces in anticipation of a danger. The other party, feeling insecure, builds up their own armaments and position in order to balance out your threats and your military augmentation. So what happens is now Hezbollah, Iran, and whoever else is also on their toes, while America is awaiting anyone to provoke. And what you have is a possibility that this thing will go out of hand simply by, Hezbollah launching more missiles against Israel, and suddenly you have America involved in another Middle Eastern war. I think Prime Minister Netanyahu has manipulated the American president into getting involved, perhaps eventually, hopefully not, into another regional conflict. That would be catastrophic. One, for Israel. Two, for America. And certainly for the United States and the Middle East region. I think the United States needs to sober up. I think it needs to get its politics out of its strategy. I think they need to hold back. I think they need to start talking about diplomacy. And I think it's time for the American president to start speaking about an immediate ceasefire. Even if it's just empty words, we need to hear him. We need to hear the American president and his European allies, in addition to expressing their unconditional support to Israel, to start speaking about diplomacy and ending the state of war. Because we all know, and I think the American president probably should know first, that there is no military solution to the Palestinian problem. There isn't even a military solution to Hamas, because it is a resistance group. It is not sole purpose is to kill Jews. Hamas was born in the 1980s as a result of the Israeli occupation. Hamas did not exist before the Israeli occupation existed. No, it is not anti-Semitism. Hamas is not Palestinian resistance is not anti-Semitism. Even if some of them would actually use some horrific, unacceptable language against Israel and Jews. But it's not anti-Semitic. It's resistance against occupation. And they are the product of occupation. And it is a sad day that we are where we are here because of Israel's occupation and American support, unconditional support to Israel as it continues to occupy and settle illegally in Palestine.
Marwan Bishara, look, thank you very much for your reaction and commentary after the speech we just heard from the U.S. President Joe Biden a very short while ago from the White House. Thanks, Marwan.
This literally